Hi everyone, welcome to Behind the Numbers. I'm your host, Dave Bookbinder. I'm a Senior Director of Valuation Services at CFGI. In my world, business performance and business value is measured by the numbers, but savvy leaders know that there's usually more to the story than just the numbers. This is the show where we dig a little bit deeper to understand what really matters most in business. I was reading a stat the other day that 90% of the businesses in the US are family-owned businesses. Today we're talking about issues that impact family-owned businesses with my guest, Matt Kerzner, who's Senior Manager at EisnerAmper Center for Family Business Excellence. Matt, welcome to Behind the Numbers.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me.
That's going to be a great conversation. So Matt, I usually ask my guests to just tell the audience a little bit about who they are, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. So I'm Matt Kerzner. I work for EisnerAmper in the Center for Family Business Excellence. And I am a family business advisor. My background is I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, a business psychologist by trade. And I work with family-owned businesses, tightly held businesses, really, help them with the emotions before the actual emotions take over. I've been with EisnerAmper for close to 2 years, since the inception of the center. And I work with, like I said, family-owned businesses and tightly held businesses.
Yeah, so because it's the preponderance of the businesses in the US, there's a lot of folks who are interested in the topics we're going to be kicking around today, Matt. Mm-hmm. And when I have other guests on the program and we're talking about family businesses, a lot of times we get into the conversation of the exit and succession and family dynamics. And most of these folks, whether they're attorneys or other intermediaries, they always say the same thing. I feel like I've got to be a business psychologist to work with family-owned businesses. Well, you happen to be a business psychologist. Mm-hmm. So how does that help you in your day-to-day?
I get a lot of phone calls from attorneys, accountants, people who work with businesses, and they deal with a lot of, the transactional. They want to do the transaction. Mm-hmm. But then there's some conflicts that come in because of emotions that are happening with that. So I really work with the family businesses and the owners to help them navigate through whatever they're going through, to help them make some decisions of what they want to do. It could be that they're having a succession situation where they want to pass the business on to their children, but the children aren't ready yet. Could be because of age, could be because of education, could be because of experience. So, they could engage someone like myself to come in and work with the next generation to help them find their voice and find out what they need to get ready. That's one example.
Yep.
Another example is, let's say that the owners of the business want to transition the business over to their family members, but they're not old enough yet. So they might need to bring in a non-family member to run the business for a while. We have to make sure that it's a right cultural fit for the family. So we help, do that. Another one is that they might decide that it's time to sell the business, and there's a lot of emotions that go along with that. So I help not only the owner, but the family members really work through some of that processes.
Gotcha. And I know we're called Behind the Numbers here on this program, but I know you have some numbers and some statistics that you want to share.
I do. I think it's important. I always get into trends and some of the statistics. Great. So, the first one is the estimated lifespan of a family-owned business is only 24 years. So it's really important that we talk about passing the business on, or they want to pass the business on to the next generation.
Yeah, 24 years sounds like it's just one generation.
One generation. Most family businesses only make it through the first generation.
Wow.
Right? So it's really important when the first generation owner is looking to transition the business that we really work through some of that. So yeah, that's a really eye-opening statistic.
Right.
Another one is 40% of the family-owned business owners are going to retire in the next 10 years. So there's going to be a lot of movement transitioning the business either to the next generation, to a non-family member, to the employees, or selling the business. Yep. Right? So there's just going to be what I call the tsunami of these family-owned businesses having to make a decision of what they're going to do, right? Because of that trend or that stat. The next one is there's going to be, talking about numbers, right? There's going to be $10.4 trillion that's going to transition from one generation to the next because of the baby boomers retiring. Yeah. There's so many people that are going to be retiring that there's going to be a lot of money transitioning to the next generation. So we also work with families to help them educate their children or other family members about wealth management, and how to, what I call live, leave, and then give.
Yeah.
Right, to help them through that process.
Makes sense.
35% of the Fortune 500 businesses are family owned.
Yeah, that's worth repeating, because I think a lot of folks, when they think about family-run businesses, they think small organizations, pizza shops, gas stations, things like that. But say that stat one more time.
Yeah, I will. 35% of Fortune 500 companies are family-owned, which is, think about that. I mean, I think of like Walmart.
Yeah.
Right? That's a family-owned business. Or if you really look at some of the big, giant businesses and you look at the root of how they started, they were family-owned.
Yeah, no, I've worked with a number of family-owned businesses throughout my career. They're privately held and valuations in the billions.
Yeah. Another important one, too, is according to the Small Business Administration, 90% of family-owned businesses, or 90% of businesses, are family-owned. Either family-owned, or there's partners, or run by husband and wives.
It's good to know I got that stat right at the opening then.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
Thank you for corroborating.
And that's another thing that we help with, right? When you have a family-owned business that's run by a spouse, husband and wife, there could be conflicts on one's ready to retire, one's not.
Yeah.
Or there's other emotional issues that go on with
Oh,
marriages, right? And another one is, it's really hard for an owner of a family-owned business to be able to take off the owner hat or the CEO hat and then put on the father hat or the husband hat.
Sure.
Right? So when you're working with a family business and you have family members working for the business, when does the clock stop? And sometimes you get burnt out because of that.
Yeah.
That's another reason why there are a lot of emotional issues that come on, because they're talking business at the breakfast table, at the lunch table, at the dinner table, watching the TV show at night, going on family vacation. So when do they know how to turn it on and turn it off?
That's a good point.
Right? And then the last step, or the last trend, and I'm getting this through my research, through my study of getting my PhD, is I'm finding that owners of family businesses, usually there's something that triggers emotionally when they're young that makes them really connected to the business. That business is actually part of who they are, meaning it's either a child or a sibling or a spouse to the owner. So they are extremely emotionally attached to the business. So when I work with family-owned businesses and owners, and we start talking about, selling the business or transitioning the business either to another family member or to a non-family member, it is very scary for that owner because they are so connected to that business. I use the analogy when I speak. It's almost like a father walking their daughter down the aisle at a wedding, and they're giving their daughter away. Usually there's two looks on their body language. Super excited and say, she's yours, right? I'm giving it to you. Or the look of, I'm so scared, I'm giving away something so precious, right? So there's a lot of resistance when it comes to making a decision of some type of transaction because of the emotional connection that the owner has to the business.
It's interesting because metaphorically, business owners will say, yes, it's my baby. And it really is much more than that. It's a lot deeper. And one of the things I hear a lot from business owners regarding transition and succession is that they don't want to sell because they don't know what they're going to do in retirement. So maybe they're hanging around a little longer than they should.
That's great that you say that. One of the things that we do is, and it's a philosophy that we have at the center, is we want people to transition with dignity. So when I work with owners and they're starting to talk about either retirement or selling the business, I always ask them, let's say for example, today's July 10th. Let's say it's going to be August 1st is the day that they're selling, right? Or they're leaving the business. I always say, what does August 2nd look like for you? Right? What does your calendar look like? What activities are you going to do? Because what happens is transitioning or leaving a business or doing something, it's going to trigger something. And if they are institutionalized and they've been working in this family business for 30, 40 years, right? They grew up in this, right? Especially, or they started it, right? And they've developed it, or we'll use the 24 years, right? That stat. Even 24 years is a chunk of time. So for them to actually stop doing what they're doing, they're institutionalized, and then they have to start the next journey of their life is very, very scary. And that actually is a major resistance of why a transaction is going to happen.
Yep. So for those who are watching, if you'd like to learn more about Matt and how you might be able to work with him, what's the best way that folks can contact you?
Absolutely. So I could be reached at, I'll give you my email address. It's Matthew.Kerzner, Kerzner, at EisnerAmper.com. Or the best way to get me is my office number, because I'm always out and about, is to call my cell number, which is 203-671-5239.
That's a really good spot to take a quick commercial break. Matt, don't go anywhere, and you don't go anywhere. We're going to pay a few bills, and we'll be right back with Behind the Numbers.
RVN-TV is a platform for people of any industry to share their story. Over 285,000 viewers are tuning in to RVN-TV shows monthly. We guarantee a great experience that you'll be sharing with everyone you know while increasing your personal and company's brand awareness. But what is your brand? According to Forbes, it's a combination of your logo, your product, your design and feel, and your personality. Did you know that aside from being a guest, we offer even more opportunity to boost your brand? Adding your company logo and website on screen during your interview will allow viewers to recognize your brand instantly. Incorporating images and video clips is another great way to showcase your product during your live segment. Let viewers see how good you really are. And most importantly, there's you and your interview. For less than the cost of a newspaper, direct mail, or a magazine ad, you can leave our studio and within 48 hours have a permanent digital copy of your live segment to link to your social media, embed into your company website, or use in email marketing. Investing in your brand is so very important, and we can't wait to have you as a guest.
Shelter dogs aren't broken. They've simply experienced more life. If they were human, we would call them wise. They would be the ones with tales to tell and stories to write, the ones dealt a bad hand who responded with courage. Do not pity a shelter dog. Adopt one.
Say we've got grit, and we'll take it as a compliment. Because it's our uncommon drive, our spark within, that brings us together and sets us apart. We are temple made. And when others take shortcuts, when others take breaks, when others take the easy way, we take charge.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Behind the Numbers. I'm Dave Bookbinder, and today we're talking about issues that impact family-held businesses with Matt Kerzner, who's with EisnerAmper Center for Family Business Excellence. And Matt, before the break, you were talking a little bit about resistance, the reluctance of family members to either move forward or move forward together.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So, Dave, when we get engaged or we get a phone call from a family or from an attorney or an accountant that's working with a family business, usually that term comes up. There's some resistance, they don't want to do the transaction, or we're not quite sure what's going on. So then we will then meet with the prospective client. We have a conversation with them, and then the first thing we do is we usually do a baby step, and we do a discovery process. And through that discovery process, we do a bunch of interviews with the family members, senior leaders of the organization, whoever they feel is important. Yeah. And we really try to, right, it's like going to the doctor and having a physical, figuring out where the root cause of the problem is. A lot of times we get a phone call, and I'm using this as an analogy, I got, the business has a pain in the hip, right? They have this pain, and they describe that this pain in the hip is bothering them, and it's getting in the way of a transaction. But then when we start doing our discovery, we find out that the pain is not in the hip, it's actually in the knee, radiating to the hip because of other issues that are going on. And usually we find out there's a problem with communication, there's not clear communication, there could be some conflict that's going on with the family or with people in the business. So usually through the discovery process, we find out that people are not rowing in the same direction, right? And as you know, and as other people know, if you're not rowing in the same direction and you're rowing in opposite directions, you're going to be on this hamster wheel. And that's where emotions start bubbling up and conflict bubbles up. So what I like to do, and one of the proposals that I make as part of a recommendation, is go through what I call a strategic roadmap exercise.
Okay.
And this is really an activity where I talk a little bit about what is the mission, what is the vision, what is the values of the organization. Yep. And I have conversations, I facilitate this conversation with the family members, key leadership people within the organization, and I listen to them. I take some of the information that they currently already have, if they don't already have a mission, vision, and values, and I take a look at that information. And then I start talking about what are the major goals of the organization for the next year, next 2 years, next 3 years, 5 years, whatever they feel is important to them. And I'll capture those 5 goals. And from those goals, then we try to cascade it down through the organization and start talking about how do we measure this, right? What are the deliverables that are needed? Again, how do we measure it? What's in scope and out of scope of what they need to do?
Yep, and I think we have that on the screen right there.
Great, yes, that's the actual, what I call the pyramid of the strategic roadmap. And what's really interesting is when we start going through each of these phases and having what I call an enriched conversation, and we go through it, then we can start cascading those large goals and figuring out how you cascade it down to the whole organization. So again, everybody's rowing in the same direction. If a family business is looking to sell and they might not be where they need to be, then we will go through this exercise to see where they are. For example, after we start putting some of the goals together, we start looking at how do you want to grow the business development, right? And what are the things that you want to introduce or create or make better? What revenue needs to change? Are you where you are? Did you decrease in revenue, and how do you turn that around? So really, what are some of the goals to look at your business and develop those? Another one is operating efficiency. When I come in and I do this exercise, we find out that there's a lot of redundancy or overlap, or people, when you look at roles and responsibilities of employees or even key leaders or even owners of the business, they're wearing multiple hats and they're actually competing with each other because they're getting in each other's swimming lanes. Yeah. So really, how do you do things better, faster, more quality, and do operation efficiency? Do you need to bring in some technology? Do you need to bring in other resources? How do you clarify those roles and responsibilities? And then the third, and I think is the most critical piece, is people, is your people resources. And what do you have for your bench strength? Who is ready to take over leadership positions today, tomorrow, 5 years from now? What gaps do they have? What do we need to develop them? Who's retiring in the next 3 to 5 years that you might have to do succession planning? Key positions. So the people side of the business and part of the strategic roadmap is really looking internally at the people, at the resources, and what do you need to really help them bring up to the next level. Yeah. Once you do those 3 major buckets, then we can cascade those larger goals and really start introducing them into departments or individual employees, so their performance goals are linked to the company's goals or the family business goals, so then everybody is starting to move in the same direction. Usually this activity, it could, depending on the size of the organization and how many people are involved, it could take a day, it could take 3 days. Usually I do retreats with owners and some of the key leadership people, and we go through this exercise, and I have a series of questions that I ask, and we have some rich dialogue. And then we really populate this chart that you see here. Really, if you look at each bucket, right, like vision, mission, values, that's kind of like its own entity as part of this process, and we develop this whole roadmap for the organization to get them ready for whatever they need to do.
Yeah. So getting everybody in alignment obviously is super important. Family harmony, so that the dinner table, everyone's getting along. But let's get into just a little more numbers, if you don't mind.
Sure.
My instinct is when you've got everybody rowing in the right direction and they're not just metaphorically spinning in circles, it's got to manifest in the numbers, the KPIs for the business, whether it's sales, profitability, safety, valuation, what have you. What's been your experience there?
Yeah, it's a very positive experience. I mean, it's an eye opener. Once everybody is starting to row in the same direction, And this is what I like to say, right? People like to wear many different hats. And when you're in a family business, you have to.
Sure.
But everybody has a sweet spot. Everybody has their what they're really good at. So I use baseball as an analogy, right? If you have a baseball team and you have all your players out in the field, everybody has a position that they play. If everybody clearly understands what their roles and responsibilities are, and they get the proper resources and what I call education on getting ready, right, to move the needle, you're going to see people and you're going to see the numbers come in line. So once everybody has an agreement of what the mission, vision, values are, what they want to do for business development, growing the business, operation efficiency, you absolutely see positive numbers on the profit and loss statement because, one, you're taking redundancy out.
Yep.
You're bringing in possible technology that's going to help things go better, faster, and with quality. And you're also educating your workforce to take on more, right? So cross-training is another important piece. So yes, all that I'm saying here, you are absolutely seeing positive numbers because people are rowing in the right direction.
Awesome. How can our audience learn more about you and how can they contact you?
Yeah, that's great. So the best way to get a hold of me is they could reach out to and email me at Matthew Kerzner or Matthew.Kerzner at EisnerAmper.com. They can call me on my cell phone. It's the best way to get me because I'm out and about all the time. That's 203-671-5239. Or they can go on EisnerAmper's website and go to the Center for Family Business Excellence. They can learn more about our center. They can learn about myself and my colleagues that are on my team.
Excellent. I know we only have probably a few more minutes left because time flies here and behind the numbers, but you have another slide. Do you want to talk about that or do you want to move into a different area?
No, let's, if we can get to that slide,
Okay.
great. So this slide here, it talks about what I call the human resource model. And when we were talking about business development, operating efficiency, and people, the people side of it is really the human resources. So with family-owned businesses, especially small to medium-sized operations, they don't have a full-blown HR department. But I do think that they need to think about human resources. And I believe every leader, manager, supervisor is a human resource manager for the organization. So the key thing here is how do you bring in talent, right? How do you constantly bringing in talent? And that is requiring talent. The second one is, once you do that, how do you reward and recognize your workforce? So I like to work with the organization, one, on how to select and find the right talent, then reward the people that they have, reward and recognize the workforce. And then you have to constantly develop them. So what do you need to do for succession planning? What I like to call path of progression. How do you get people motivated to stay with the organization? One of the hardest things is when you're dealing with a family-owned business that might have 20, 30, 40, 50 employees, there's not a lot of movement up. Could be a flat organization. But employees still want to grow and develop. So how do you do that? And then the last bucket here is how do you protect your employees? That's policy, procedure, that's the employee handbook. People need to know the rules of working for a family business, especially when the family owner has the culture and has their way of doing things. The employees need to understand what that is.
Yeah.
So when you're working with family businesses, I find out that human resources probably falls under the umbrella of the CFO or the controller or even the owner. They don't have a dedicated HR department. So when I go in and I work with family businesses, I help them understand the importance of human resources. And if they don't have a dedicated HR human resource person, that we can educate them on all the processes needed to make them successful.
Probably only have about 2 minutes to go, but I want to ask you one question on behalf of the folks working in family-owned businesses that don't have the same last name as the owner, because I've seen this dynamic. Talk a little bit about what that is like and how they can influence change and be a real leader in an organization where they're not a family member.
That's great, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I encourage the owners or even family members that are working for the business, they should treat their non-family members like family because they work really hard for the family business and they make a huge impact. So it's really important for the owners and the senior leaders who are family members or non-family members to make sure that the employees who are non-family have a voice. So, I use the word engagement, employee engagement. I use the word employee satisfaction. I use the word continuous improvement. If you want to do all those things, the owners and the senior leaders need to listen to those non-family members because they are the critical piece of your organization.
Yeah, and you talk about rowing in the same direction. They've got to have the ability and the authority to call out the family members perhaps who aren't living up to their responsibilities.
That is correct. And I also, that's another thing, is I work with family members and we put together what's called the Sibling Code of Conduct. And that is how do they work together? So, behind closed doors they can debate, they can get into disagreements, but when they leave that room, they need to be one voice, and they need to make sure that the employees are hearing one voice. And if the employees are pushing back, the family members should not get upset. They should actually be happy that the employees are engaged enough to be able to ask those questions to make sure they have the expectation of rowing in the right direction.
Yeah, so no entitlements, no special provisions for family.
No. When we got into protecting, right, the last bucket of the HR about protecting employees, one of the things that we work with family businesses, especially when family members are now going to come into the business, is what are some of the policies to make sure that there's accountability for them and that they're treated no differently than any employee in the organization.
Good stuff. Matt, unfortunately, we're out of time. As I told you, time goes fast here and Behind the Numbers. Yeah. Today we were talking about issues that impact family-run and family-held businesses with Matt Kerzner, Senior Manager at EisnerAmper Center for Family Business Excellence. Till next time, we'll see you again on Behind the Numbers. Take care.